Carita Walker as my guest here today. Carita is currently the Chief Legal Officer, General Counsel, Head of Legal, that's a mouthful, for Shell Recharge Solutions, America and Asia. She has deep global experience in environmental and corporate law. So, Carita, thank you so much for being our guest here today. I'm really excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited as well.
So I'm going to start out, and I'm going to ask you the question that I ask all of the guests that are on this podcast and on the show is, tell us a little bit about, okay, so how did you get to be this title? Because we have this title that we have, right? But there's a journey that's involved in that. So can you talk a little bit about what's been the path for you to get to where you are today, working for Shell?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career, a bit on a traditional path of working in private practice at law firms. And then I decided I wanted to work as an in-house lawyer. And I think the moment that I thought that I might want to become a general counsel was during my interview for the Shell job almost 15 years ago.
Interesting.
And the general counsel at that time was a woman named Kathy Lambelet. And I remember walking into her office and shaking her hand. And I remember that she had a soft handshake. And, at that time they were telling women you have to have a firm handshake. And I think at that moment, I realized almost immediately that I thought, you know what, I could be a general counsel.
Wow.
Because all of a sudden I thought all of these structures, all of these things that were supposed to be a certain kind of way, all of a sudden I realized, well, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. I don't have to necessarily have this firm handshake that everybody's telling us we need to have, in order to be successful or to reach to the highest levels, to the C-suite. And, arriving at Shell, I was living in the Bay Area in California, and then I moved to Texas to work in Houston. And I remember the women who were leaders in the organization. I mean, they were wearing red nail polish and they were saying y'all, and and they were powerful leaders. And so I thought, you know what, I could absolutely do this. But I also want to add one more piece to this. When I was living and working overseas in Doha, Qatar, I became the governance officer for the USA Girl Scouts overseas in Doha. And I was asked to be the governance officer, and my first response was, no, I don't think I really want to do that, because, I've said, it's like, what do I spy with my legal eyes? A lot of liability with all of these kids.
Right.
And then I also think that I was a bit nervous about it because, I recognized that in that role, the buck was going to stop with me around certain questions. And, did I really have the courage to say yes, no, and make firm decisions, for everybody's safety and well-being? And I took the plunge. I said yes after the second ask. And I really do feel like once I started that role and began to walk in it a bit, I realized I think that kind of laid the foundation for, maybe I really, really can do this.
Wow. It's interesting how saying yes to things, how that impacts, right? And we're hesitant at first, and then all of a sudden that decision or saying yes to something that we were going to say no to impacts just the trajectory of our career. I'm sure there's much more to that story, right? This whole leadership trajectory. But let me ask you this: as you sit where you are now and you look back on that person 15 years ago, rising up, what advice would you give to that person, to that woman growing into the role and growing into your career? What advice would you give?
I would say, you can manifest what you want with intention, and sometimes taking little steps along the way. I think it's important I would tell myself, to let go of any preconceived notions of how you think things will look. So there needs to be, I would tell her,
Mhm.
You need to be willing to even though you have this intention, you need to be willing to let go of how the universe or how God is going to actually make that happen. And I think the final thing I would certainly really want to convey to my younger self is the importance of authenticity and what you get for that. It's too much work to try to be someone else or to try to fit into a mold. And I've just learned and I'm seeing that the more authentic I am, the more authentic I see other people, in terms of how they bring themselves. It's just, to me, I think that's a better formula for success.
What does that mean to you? Like being your authentic self? Because that means a lot of different things. And I think sometimes, Carita, for some people, it's also an excuse to like say whatever I want, right? I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to tell you like it is. And I could be rude. I can be all of these things. What do you refer to when you mean being authentic?
There have been moments where I've had to find out, where I've had to look at myself and say, you know what, I'm not even sure what my authentic self is.
Mhm.
Because I've been trying to fit this particular
Right.
mold and trying to be this particular thing because that's what society says I should do or how I should act, etc. But for me, I think in terms of specific behaviors, I mean, it is me sharing a bit more personally about who I am. So I've spent a large part of my life as a dancer, and most people that I worked with for years never knew that about me. And for some reason, I didn't share it. And I'm not sure why. I thought it didn't fit with the mold of being a lawyer, or that people might not take me seriously if they knew that that was a passion of mine. But then actually, I worked with a woman on my LinkedIn profile. And she said, Carita, you need to put some elements in here about, your passion for dance. She said, because otherwise, she said, when people meet you, you don't make any sense.
No, and what I hear there, I mean, I think it's so poignant. What you're saying is there's a piece of bringing all of you, right? Not hiding, because I think we hide certain parts of ourselves that we think, well, it goes back to the handshake. It doesn't fit into the mold. It doesn't fit into
Right.
what I'm supposed to be doing. But I also like what you said about the concept of not really knowing our authentic self sometimes, because so many layers of this, we get lost in it. And so the more you're experimenting and expressing all sides of yourself is what I hear, and how powerful that is, and how powerful it's been for you.
Right, indeed, and also, the point you raised about, some people want to, exude bad behavior or socially unacceptable behavior,
Right.
so that under the rubric of, oh, I'm being authentic.
Right.
Well, I think that, to that person, I would probably say, yeah, I mean, is that truly authentically who you are?
Right.
Right. And I also think that we all need to, do pay attention to the type of impact that we want to have on other people.
Yeah.
Right. Both positive and negative. And I think it's a choice.
Yeah. No,
as well.
and it all goes back to that, right? It all goes back to choice, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think sometimes we confuse that authentic with some of our own defensive protective mechanisms. Now talk to me about obstacles, right? So did you encounter, or do you feel like you encountered any unique obstacles just growing into into leadership roles, growing into the trajectory of your career, either being a woman or in any other fashion that you might have encountered? You want to talk a little bit about that, if you had that?
There were definitely challenges. I do find it's hard for me to differentiate as an African American woman, which of these challenges might be attributed to being a woman, which ones might be attributed to being African American. It's really hard for me to say. Mostly, it's hard for me to understand the woman piece, to be honest, because I often attribute some of the challenges to being African American in corporate America. But the reality is, though, is that yeah, I think it's the battling of stereotypes. Right?
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to the authenticity piece. all right, and not wanting to be perceived a certain kind of way. And so then I downplay aspects of my personality, so that the stereotype that the world or the culture might have of people who look like me doesn't attach. And I think that, that was certainly an obstacle that took me a long time to overcome. Probably didn't even realize I had it, I think initially, for years. And then when I realized that I was doing these things, I realized how much it held me back. And once I relieved myself from that, I became more creative, more innovative. I asked more questions, I took more risks. But I will say that, in my role right now, because I've been in the general counsel role for about 2 years now, I've got a great leadership team.
Mhm.
And we've taken the time as a team to get to know one another. And as a result of that work, we know, well, when this particular person is in stress, they tend to micromanage or, so different behavioral characteristics. And I think it gives, it helps us give each other grace.
Okay.
Right. And so on a leadership team in that way, I think, taking the time to getting to know one another has really helped, I think, with, feelings of me potentially not feeling included, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I'm struck by so many things that you said in what you just said, because there's so much depth in there. But I'm particularly stuck by the stereotype, because I think what that does is it puts us, in whatever stereotypes that we're dealing with, it puts us in a defensive mode.
Mhm.
And then it minimizes our own power,
Correct.
right? I mean, because when we're in a defensive mode, we're defending, who I am. I'm having to defend who I am. I mean, at least that's what I'm hearing. And so, and then, no, I'm not this way, or I'm not this. And then you lose a part of yourself. And so what you said, when you overcame that, what was the, I don't know if it was a catalyst or what helped with that for you?
Well, it was living overseas in the Middle East,
Really?
in Doha, Qatar. And I've shared with folks before. I've done some presentations on my time there, and so it is, definitely very different than American culture. And in America, you've heard, I'm sure we've all heard the term white privilege, et cetera.
Absolutely.
But there is a standard, that in America that privileges whiteness, right? And so the more you lean towards that, in theory, the better off you'll be. In Qatar, whiteness is not
That's not the case, right?
case. It's not the
Yeah.
norm.
Right.
And so I was watching myself doing these behaviors, and I thought, nobody here cares about that. So why am I acting like that?
Right.
And so then I thought, do I ever have to act like that? And who could I be if I'm not acting like that? What could I create? How much energy am I expending? So I think for me, just being in a different environment where the baseline assumptions don't exist.
Yeah.
And I think this would be true for anyone. It doesn't matter, your race or what have you. I think it's important for people to travel or even to just be in a different culture than what they're accustomed to, so that they can begin to see themselves a little bit differently and observe themselves behaviorally and ask yourself, why am I acting like that?
Let's talk a little bit about self-doubt, going, as you're navigating, because a lot of the women I talk with talk a lot about having self-doubt, especially when not fitting a norm, like not having the firm handshake or whatever. Is like, oh, well, I'm not meeting that criteria. And there was actually a study in 2020 by KPMG. They surveyed people who went to their Women's Leadership Summit, and they talked about this concept of the imposter phenomenon, which is the imposter syndrome, and that 75% of female executives had experienced that. And you talk about, you and I have talked about this before, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about your experiences with either self-doubt or feeling like an imposter or anything like that.
Yeah, I remember when I was first introduced to this concept of the imposter syndrome. I was part of a senior women's coaching circle, and that was the topic of the first meeting. And I did the pre-read, and I remember looking at the pre-read, and I thought, you know what, this doesn't really resonate that well with me. I don't know that I feel like an imposter. And I remember in the beginning of the session, the facilitator asked for everybody's reactions, et cetera. And I said, well, I don't really understand this imposter syndrome thing, because I know who the real imposters are, and it's not me. And, right. And
Love it.
yeah, to which she said, we'll talk about that offline. But
you know what to say, right?
Yeah, right. Well, the thing is that I just, at that time, it's taken me a while to really understand what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I've ever felt like I didn't belong, or at least it takes me some time to kind of unpack that for myself, or it's taken some time. And I'm sure there must have been moments where I didn't have a whole lot of confidence, about a new setting, or a new skill, or being in a new role, or taking on a new matter, et cetera. But, I think I've always felt like I could figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
right? That I do have that skill set at a minimum. But, and it's because of you, actually, and only recently, I would say the last month, that I actually finally kind of understand what it means. But one of the other things that I found very powerful in understanding imposter syndrome was one of the seminars that was done by Chief, that talked about how identity-based trauma shows up as imposter syndrome. Yeah. And so, I realized that, yeah, there are times where I am, where I'm treated as if I don't belong.
Right.
Right. And I think if for all women, if you're consistently not promoted, not recognized, not valued, not given opportunities, then yeah, I do think that we start to ask ourselves, well, do I belong here?
Right.
And so I think that there's some more unpacking that needs to go on around, why is it that women might lack confidence or have some self-doubt, and look at the circumstances, right, and see what's going on in the culture, the environment of an organization. Not that it, doesn't exist, in the way it's traditionally defined.
Yeah.
But, in my opinion, there's no reason why extraordinarily competent women, experienced women, accomplished women should, walk around feeling as if they don't belong.
A lot of the things that we've identified as attributes for leaders are male characteristics. And so then when a woman comes in and has maybe opposite of those characteristics, but yet is a very competent leader, there's an identity crisis there, because I don't fit that mold, and when you're not fitting the mold, it goes back to that. So yeah. The very profound comments there. Thank you, Carita. What are some of the biggest frustrations and challenges you face now at this level? Because things change as you move in your career in different stages.
Yeah, I think at this stage in my career, what I'm most challenged with is making sure that I have the right level of support around me, and making sure that I invest the time to take advantage of that support. I've heard it called, your personal board of directors, making sure that I have, colleagues and family and friends around me, to help me get through those tough moments, or not, or just to have, a breakaway to just remember who I am. Right. And, I also get that, being a leader can be lonely. Right. Especially when you're at the top of an organization and a team. You are the only one, right? there is only one general counsel for this particular, business that we operate. And I had a manager who was a mentor of mine, when I told her that I wanted to, in terms of career trajectory, I wanted to become a manager. And I remember her saying to me, well, being a manager, that's a different career path, right? It's very different than being an individual contributor or being, a senior lawyer.
That's true.
And yeah, it's a very different career path. And, she was a very interesting person, very powerful in her own right, super, super, super duper smart. And I remember being in my office, and I was early on when I joined Shell, I was in my office, and a number of colleagues were in my office, and we were laughing, having a good time. And she walked in, wanting to join in the conversation and laughter. And little by little, people started, sliding out the door. Until it was just the two of us. And I told her, I said, you sure know how to clear a room. And we both started laughing, right? And I said, what is that? And I was like, why is it that people don't want to engage, right? And so there's this archetype of leader, I think, that people don't want to engage with. And I realized, and she's the one who, told me, she said, it can be lonely, right? People don't want to talk to you, right? Because of whatever perception that they may have. And I think because of, that advice and that steer, she became a sponsor of mine.
I think people don't realize, Carita, as we move up in the organization, that you're not just Carita, you're the role. And people are identifying us with the role as, not as the person so much. And we identify with the person. So we're like, hey, I hear people all the time, a lot of my clients, I'm still the same person. I don't understand why people aren't approaching me or aren't telling me the truth or won't give me feedback. And because with the role comes authority, it comes control over my career, right? There are a lot of things. I've got to ask you this question. I could talk to you all day, right? I mean, there's so many gems of wisdom that you're giving us here. But let me ask you this. And I ask this of everyone who's on the show, what's an inspirational quote that conveys the wisdom that you would offer as an inspiration to anyone listening or watching here today?
So, so one of my favorite quotes is from the original founder of the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater in New York. Just a super inspiring dance company. I'm just uplifted every time I see them perform. And Alvin Ailey, in an interview, a recorded interview that I heard from him, says that what he says to the dancers is that if you can take these steps and show us yourself through them, then that will be a powerful experience for the audience. And so what I love about that, and why I think it's a good quote for women leaders, is it goes back to what we were talking about before about authenticity, right? And I think that the roles that we are in as leaders, that these are just conduits for bigger things, for us to, have an impact on the world, or even what our true purpose is in life. It's just a framework for us to bring something through. Right. And so I feel like I would say to, my other women leaders like myself, it's like, if we can take these roles and show ourselves through them, then that's going to be a powerful experience for the people that we are attempting to lead.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's my quote, Janet.
Yeah, I got the goosebumps as you say that, because I think it's really, really profound. And it's funny, the metaphor of dance seems to resonate here as we're talking, right? That we all are in some sort of a dance, that flow. I love it. What other parting words of wisdom would you offer? You've given us a lot here today. Any other parting words?
I know for women, we are, or I guess anyone that's in a leadership role, we're prompted to try to find our leadership voice. I will say that that is definitely a work in progress for me. I'm learning that it takes time. I think before I got into a leadership role, I was definitely, the line attorney employee that was saying they need to do this and somebody should. I wish that they would. It's a lot different when you're sitting in that seat or sitting in these seats.
Where's the they?
Yeah.
I'm for they. I'm the they, right?
I'm the they.
Uh-oh.
Now what?
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing that I'm learning right now is that, and this is what I've gotten from mentors, from a mentor, as well as from HR, right? Who here at Shelby Choice Solutions takes a really critical role in leadership development, not just for the team, but also for the leadership team itself, is that you have to keep working at it. And I think the commitment to developing the voice, I think is really all that anyone can ask for.
Yeah. And I think that's a great note to end on. And I have to ask you a follow-up question on that. So how do you know when you found your voice? Or do we ever find it completely? I don't know.
Right now, I don't know that I can put it on a slide.
Right.
Yet, right? And I also think it evolves over time as well. I am pretty clear that it's true to one's own authenticity, for sure, your own sense of purpose. Things that I have said in the past around, what I might have said in terms of what my purpose is in life, doesn't quite wear right anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think once you're able to, it just rolls off the tongue. It's pretty easy to say. And I wouldn't say I'm quite there yet.
Well, I don't know. I have to say, I think we're all a work in progress, but I will tell you just from this interview today, I think we've definitely heard your voice.
Awesome.
And your voice matters. I know it's going to matter to a lot of people who are listening. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
For being a guest today.
Absolutely. Thank you.